for this evening. And I emphasize this. I never have an idea of what I'm going to talk about until I get started. And the reason I do this, because when you don't have any plans of what you're going to say, it's much easier to actually to tune in to what needs to be said, from you. And to trust, and especially after a nice meditation, that you can tune into peacefulness and say the right things. A lot of times we have the theories of Buddhism, and we have just all the teachings. And you could read books to listen to those teachings, or go online and listen to talks. But there's something else when you hear it live. Because when you hear it live, what you're doing is it's not just a theory, it's something which is from practice and how it works in people's lives and how it has real tangible benefits which you can touch, you can feel, you can experience. You don't have to prove it to anybody else because it's in your own experience. And one of the things which came up just a minute ago was that sometimes that to understand Buddhism, it's really helpful to know the difference between the brain and the mind. We use that word, just without really knowing what we say, the mind, the heart, or whatever, but actually to know what it truly is. The brain is a very physical thing. And I love all these examples gathered over the years of people who have weird brains. I collect these, and just for extra proof of the mind is totally different than the brain. Unfortunately, it was science, people like Descartes, I'm not going to go too much into philosophy, who started separating out the brain from the mind. Traditionally, anyone who reads Plato, that they had the mind and the brain were separate. Another interesting thing, that those of you who studied a lot of Buddhism or practiced in retreats, sometimes you hear of the 31 parts of the body. Now people think, Ajahn Brahm, you made a mistake, you're getting old. It's 32 parts of the body. The 32 parts of the body were later on. Originally there were 31. You know which one the Buddha left out? The brain. It wasn't included because it had something even more powerful, the mind. And anyhow, just even over in Greeks, where Westerners think they get all their philosophy from, even Plato always would say there is the 6 senses. Just seeing, hearing, smelling, taste, touch, but also the mind, the knowing, totally separate from the brain. If it was just the brain, then when you die or you get strokes and stuff, the brain turns off, you're dead. I don't know if any of you have seen weird stuff happen. One of those weird stuff which happens with many people is something which they call terminal lucidity. You can ask doctors. You can go online and find that term, terminal lucidity. Is that phenomena when somebody is dying and the last few minutes of their life, and sometimes even longer, half an hour I think was one of the records reported by a doctor over in the United States somewhere. You're clear. That's why it's called lucidity. You may have been in a stroke for a while, or maybe had Alzheimer's, dementia or whatever. The last minute or two of your life, you can remember. There was a doctor who comes here. I'm not sure if he's here today, but after the last time I gave a talk on things like terminal lucidity, he came up here and said that happened last week to him. That he was in Royal Perth or somewhere, one of his patients just unexpectedly started the dying process really quickly, and rushed to the bedside, and then at the bedside the patient was dying, was in a coma, couldn't speak, and then he had the instructions to the list of close family members was in the bedside drawer. Please give them a call to get them to come and see him for the last time. That was a previous instruction. That's what he was doing. Ringing up the wife, ringing up the mother or whatever who was there. And he got to about the third or fourth closest relation, the daughter, Julie. I think I remember the name accurately. And then he was ringing Julie up, come to the hospital quickly, your dad's dying. And then to the doctor's astonishment, the patient, the father, just opened his eyes and looked at the doctor and said, please tell Julie how much I love her. And that was the last words he said. He shouldn't have been able to speak those words at all. How could that happen? There's many other stories like that. The brain was not functioning. At the end of a person's life, something takes over. What takes over is the mind. The same as when you are born. The mind knows what's going on. Sometimes, I just push the limits a little bit of what I'm allowed to say and I'm not allowed to say. But this was when I was meditating. You're not allowed to say about any special powers or stuff which you get from your meditation. You can't say, as a monk, it's frustrating sometimes, I must admit, you cannot say just about past lives and things. But I know the rules for a monk, and I know I know all the loopholes. And this was when you started meditating, getting some nice deep states. How that after coming out of a deep state of meditation, the idea came up in my mind. We're not told this. I can't remember Ajahn ever told me to do this. But to ask the question, what is my earliest memory? When I said that to myself, I just thought it. The mind was very peaceful after deep meditations. You only have to think it and the mind will follow. I never had a pet dog, but people say that sometimes a little doggy is so well trained that someone just delivers a paper to the door and you tell the dog, go and collect the paper, and the dog runs outside and brings the paper back to you. I thought that's what my mind was like at the time. It just ran back and just got me the paper. My earliest memory. The first earliest memory, though, was fascinating. It wasn't a past life, it was very early life. It's a baby, maybe 2 or 3 weeks old. And you're not really supposed to remember that. Your brain is not really developed to the point where memory is very strong. But what I do remember was being in my pram, the little thing with wheels you push the baby along, and to even look at its colours and its smell, and also my favourite toy as a 2 or 3 week old baby, which was this little light blue pig which my mother called Porky. It wasn't very innovative, but little Porky the pig, it had something inside of it, probably beans or something, and you could rattle it and walk it, and that was my favourite toy as a kid, as a 2 week or 3 week old. And the point was that I could explore those sorts of memories. Were reliving the experience, not like the memory you've had, what did you eat this morning for breakfast or for lunch? This was like you're re-eating that breakfast. and your eyes were closed, nice meditation. It was fascinating. But what was really important was, it was the first time I realized just how important smell was as a baby. I never was taught that. And I recognized my mum from her smell, the Brahm from its smell. And it was weird, because I never expected things like that. And I remember giving a little talk about that, and there was a few doctors who were pediatricians, and they were telling me that, yes, apparently that in your brain, when it starts to develop, it's your sense of smell develops first of all. And you know the world by its smell, much more than its sight. And I know that as truth. And little by little, you understand many more things. How do you have those memories when you're not really supposed to have the developed mind to be able to do that? Developed brain, sorry. And remember, the mind and the brain are two totally different things. And there was, I don't think she would mind me mentioning this story, one of the ladies who come here. She's not here today, which I was just checking out, because you don't want to embarrass people. When they told me the story that she also, on one of these meditation retreats we do here, she had a very deep meditation, and she decided also to ask her mind, what's her earliest memory? And then she got, again, as a baby, just at her mother's breast, no sucking milk. And that's when, what she saw when she looked up at her mother, bore no resemblance to her mum. And that's when she really kind of freaked out. She stopped the meditation, came to see me afterwards, and said, I had this experience that, it was real. You don't imagine these things. When you get into these deep meditations, there's no doubt at all of what's happening. One of the reasons is because of the so-called 5 hindrances, the doubt is dispelled. Weird. But anyway, I asked her, well, maybe you were adopted or something. It's not the sort of thing which maybe your parents told you. But I knew her mum. She was a good person. And so I told this woman, go and ask your mother, at the right time, the right place, Mum, are you really my mum? Or was I adopted? She went and asked her mum that question. And of course, it was a very courageous thing to ask. When she did, the mother said, of course I'm your mother. What are you talking about? And the daughter asked the question and explained what had happened in the meditation. And the mother was really intrigued and asked, well, I'm your mother, but what did that person look like? And gave a very good description of the person as a baby she was seeing, sort of suckling her. And the mother was really impressed. That was your wet nurse. We came from a very good family. And I decided, or I was asked, to get a wet nurse to look after you for those first few weeks of your life. And that's an incredible description of her. I've never told you about that at all. And it really increased the people's understanding that there are some things which are not stored in your brain, but stored in your mind, if you like. And that actually gives you the idea of why we do have things like reincarnation or rebirth, and why this mind can be incredibly strong if you develop it. The other thing which I'm always fascinated by is one's feeling of wellness and health, and just how cultivating the mind can make your body very strong and resilient when it shouldn't be at all. And just even today, I think it's one of the reasons this comes up, because I was trying to react to stories which you've just heard. There's a couple of the Sri Lankan Buddhists, known for such a long time. And when this man's father got very sick, he's very old, and got me to do some chanting for him. And he came out of his sickness and survived. And this man, the son, was just trying not to, but was crying in front of me. The chanting had actually, somehow or other, got deep into this guy's mind. When the doctors thought this was the end of him, we actually healed him straight away. What is going on? It's not magic, this is not miracles. There's something which is going on there, and that is allowing the mind to exercise its power and to do incredible healings. How can this work? When I was a student, when you went to one of these places I went to was the Psychic Research Association, and this was not a bunch of loonies or people with low intelligence. One of the people which I would hang around with there, hunting ghosts, doing experiments on weird stuff, was one of my best friend. He's been here at one of the conferences we did here, Professor Bernard Carr. Now Emeritus Professor of Theoretical Physics at Queen Mary College in London University, and a close disciple, a close friend, he used to be anyway, of Stephen Hawkins, and worked together for a long time. And even Stephen just went to his marriage. And anyway, that he was also the head president of the London Society for Psychic Research. It's weird, but these things actually are true. Strange stuff. And so we used to expect, he was a scientist, top scientist. And so, how does this all work when you can do these incredible healings? And to give the explanation, one you can understand. You may have seen yourself that when in an experimental situation they hypnotized somebody and they told this person under hypnosis that a nail which was on the end of a stick was red hot. It was an ordinary nail at room temperature, and they touched that nail on one of the students' skin. The student was volunteering, put under hypnosis, and you saw it touch the skin. And the student would scream. He thought it was red hot, it was burning him. I could understand the scream, but what I couldn't understand is when a blister came up. There was no physical cause for that blister except the person's belief that it was a red hot nail. And then I felt, if you can cause a blister, the mind can cause a blister. It was a real burn. Then why can't you get rid of a tumour? Get rid of a disease using the power of your mind. And of course, I was a hard-nosed scientist, still am a hard-nosed scientist, and still understand that too, you can. And you've seen it happen many, many times. Like the guys who go, and they got, the guy over here had a brain tumour here in Perth, and doctors said no alternative, the neurosurgeon, but to do a surgery and then have these medications afterwards for the rest of your life. Medications for the rest of your life was what was thinking, I don't want to do that, had bad side effects. So what's the alternative? So he taught him some meditation, and about 11 months later he came up to me and said, tumour's gone. It's not supposed to, never had any operation, never had any medication, what happened to him, he just went there, did some meditation, no other medications, changed his lifestyle a bit. And also, when he went to the neurosurgeon, this has happened several times, and so this is what happens, this is how I remember it. What they do is they give you a scan, and after the scan they said, oh, something wrong with the machine, we have to do the scan again. If that happens to you, some really life-threatening disease, and they give a scan, and they said, something wrong with the machine, we have to do it again. Yes. Because they do it again and you find it's gone. Even years and years ago, I don't know if any of you remember this gentleman, his name was George. He has passed away now, but this was so many years ago. And the reason I liked George, he was a good friend, because he was a Cockney. And he really spoke thick East London accent. He would come to Bodhinyana Monastery, and I was the only one who could understand him. And all the other monks, please, can you translate for us? And good old George, what happened to him? Again, in those days, everyone would smoke cigarettes. And he'd been smoking all his life. And so that he got lung cancer. And his surgeon, or his doctor he lived over in Armadale. And his doctor told him, he said, look, it's a waste of time giving you any more treatment. Usually, with cancers like that, we do surgery, but we'd have to take both lungs out. There'd be nothing left. We give you radiation or chemotherapy, but maybe increase your life by another couple of months or something. But we'll do that if you want. So he said he'll go home and talk it over with his wife. He came back a week later. He decided just let nature take its course. But the doctor insisted on doing another scan. But he gave him 2 scans. Because the first scan he said something went wrong. The second scan, he was looking at it. And I remember George telling me the story. He says the doctor was looking at the scans, shaking his head. And poor old George thought, okay, be honest with me, doctor, it's got worse, hasn't it? Please, no, I'm old enough now to take it. How many days have I got left? And the doctor said, I'm shaking my head, George, because the cancer has totally disappeared. We took 2 x-rays or scans or whatever, just to be sure. You've got no tumour left, anywhere. And I asked, what have you been doing, George? And George replied, meditating. Carry on, George. And George lived another about 3 or 4 years after that. And some of the monks would see him over in Armadale when they went to pick up some medications from the pharmacy or get some building equipment from the hardware store. These were the days before Bunnings. It was a lovely story. And just somehow or other, this guy George managed again to actually contact the mind and get that mind to overcome the problem. Sometimes, do you have strange dreams sometimes? What are those dreams? Sometimes we use our brain, but I should have told one of the amazing stories, which I love telling. Happens every few years if you look in the newspapers, that somebody finds somebody without a brain. And this fellow, I do recall Professor John Lorber, his name was, and this was from Sheffield University. His field of research was how the human skull, some people have deformed human skulls, weird shapes. A lot of people don't know that because we take that for granted. You've got lots of hair on the head and stuff. But that was his field of research at Sheffield University in UK. And he found this one student whose skull shape was only marginally deformed. But this student was an honours graduate in maths, invited him on the program, and the first thing to do was do a scan of his head. And that's where Professor Lorber discovered there was no brain in his head. It was full of cerebral fluid. There was, he said to be accurate, a 1% cortex, 1% of what was to be expected. The rest was just all fluid. And at this point, if you haven't heard me do this before, I ask everybody in here, can you please move your head back and forth? If you can hear any sloshing inside, it means that you too may have no brain and just have cerebral fluid. There's no way in the world that he could have had a degree, first class with honours, in maths and was doing PhD work. He was socially just so well adjusted, had a steady girlfriend, could play sport, could do everything, but he had no brain. I'm not a doctor. My knowledge of medicine is limited. But I do remember just talking this over with one doctor who was taking me to a retreat over in Sydney years ago. And this doctor sort of told me, and I was talking about it, he said, yes. He said, I know that case. They did the scan again. I've seen the scan, he said. There is no brain in there. He said that, it shouldn't be alive, let alone just able to talk to people, to remember things and speak and just have a great ability in mathematics. He said, well, what do they do with it? And they said, we call it an anomaly. And they file it away in the back filing cabinet of the hospital and try and forget about it. And to me, that's not how science works. When there's an anomaly, it doesn't matter how many careers it challenges. There's a person who's got no brain, but has a very strong mind. He said it causes so much angst because you have to rethink some of the basic assumptions of your life. What it also means is that when your brain stops at death, the death of the brain, do you think you're not going to be aware? That has some important consequences for the ethics of your last days. A lot of times people make the point, and it's a very good point, that your state of mind, if you're a Buddhist and you understand you get reborn and how that works, so that last state of mind just before you passed away is crucial to how you get reborn. Now, many times your death process is very uncomfortable and painful, which is why that many people take morphine, or they're asked to take morphine. And some people just ask, if I take that morphine, I get so dull, so dulled out, how do I know my last thoughts are going to be good ones? And it's a dilemma for them. Please, you don't need to make it a dilemma. Take the morphine to calm you down, because you will find, doesn't matter how much your brain is dulled out in those last days before you pass away, the very end of your life, the morphine keeps working on dulling the pain in the brain, but the mind starts to take over. That terminal lucidity thing. The brain and the body are just turned off. The mind carries on. And that mind can have that peace, can have those good thoughts. Otherwise, what happens? Unfortunately, I've been with many people who have been passing away. And when you spend time with people who are dying, if they don't take that morphine, that painkiller at the end, they end up just in so much suffering, so much pain. I remember this one guy he was a Buddhist a long time. He actually asked, can you please get someone to take me round the back and shoot me? And that's not his character. He was suffering so much. So those painkillers, they dull your brain out, but your mind, which is the most important, takes over at the end. Your mind is what you start with when you're born, which is why the little babies, or sometimes when they can start talking, they can start to remember things which is not from this life, from past lives. I don't know if you've ever had those experiences, but these are true. I can't make this up. They're too weird to make up. My imagination is not so strong. There was a couple here in Perth. This was about 30 years ago. And this couple, they came to see us because they were freaking out about what had happened in the last week. They just had their second child. The Peter and Paul story. That's not the kids' real names, but I mention that because just to keep them anonymous. They weren't even Buddhists, this couple, mum and dad. And they said that they just came back from the hospital with their young son. I think his name was Paul. And they had another son about 2 years of age. And they told the elder son, time to go to bed, Peter. Go and say goodnight to your baby brother Paul. That's what he did. He went over to the little cot and said to his baby brother, only about a couple of weeks old, good night, Paul. And that's when Paul said, good night, Peter. Impossible. And so because of that, they both were stunned. And they didn't ask anything, they just watched. This time, what you call full mindfulness, full attention. And then without any prompting, the elder son, only 2 or 3 years of age, said to the baby brother again, good night, Paul. And then Paul said again, good night, Peter. Clear. And the weird part was, the parents said it in an adult voice, not in a baby voice. That's what they said. So this is, you can see that something weird is going on here. When I tell those stories, one of the reasons I tell those stories, because when I tell those stories, people come up and say, the same happened to me. But they don't like telling that to people. Their babies speak. They're afraid of being sort of committed to Greylands or over to Bentley Hospital or something. Who would actually believe you? So it's impossible. But it's actually true. How could that happen? And how it happens is the mind is still very strong. And the mind can get those lips moving and speaking. This nature of the mind is really important to understand, because it controls much more than we actually give it credit for. And one of the reasons why that when we don't admit the mind to being an important part of the human body, we call that materialism. I think philosophically, materialism is just stuff out here. And this nature of this mind is not even admitted to. However, one of the nice things about science, the physics which I learnt, they admitted there is such a thing as a mind. It's necessary, proved, if you like, by quantum physics. You need something to collapse a Schrödinger equation, to make reality as we know it, changing it from a probability to a field, to experience as we know it. And there's no way out of that. used to call it the ghost in the machine. But even the stuff like ghosts, how many of you have seen ghosts? Heard them? How can that be? Are you crazy? Are you imagining it? No, those are real. And honestly, real ghosts are not malevolent. They don't do bad things to you. They're just, sometimes just they come along, even like ghost dogs. It's weird. But it has to be a human being. Animals as well. There's this one fellow, he was a Thai boxer. I shouldn't give too much. I know he doesn't mind me giving it away because he's a Thai boxing instructor, one of the early ones, good friend. And his next door neighbour, just north of here, he had a dog. Next door neighbour was one of these builders, and the dog would always go to work with his owner every morning when he went to the building site. And the dog died. He had to take it to the vet and just inject it. It died in his arms. And what happened was the next day, as soon as you opened the door to go to work, a dog who looked exactly the same as a dog who had died ran into the house. And of course, it looked like his dog who had euthanized the day before. Run right into the house. But then he followed it, and it went into every corner of the house and curled up where it used to find a place to sleep before. And then it went out into the backyard where there was always a leaky tap in the backyard to get a drink. And then went upstairs in a unit, went upstairs where the builder's wife was still in bed. And it always would, when his master, the builder, was going to work, would always go up there and kiss the builder's wife before he would go to work. And this poor builder's wife, well, she was half asleep. She didn't have to get up early like her husband did to go to work to build something. And so she kissed the dog as normal. She didn't know she was kissing a ghost dog. Because then the dog ran down the stairs and they took photographs of it, the ghost dog. And then it just ran out of the house and went to jump in the back of the builder's ute. The builder said, "No, that's enough." And then the dog turned around, ran down the street, and never seen again. One last visit before the dog vanished forever. I know those people. They don't lie. Real. It's like it's all you people who put your hands up. Yeah, you've seen or heard a ghost. This is real stuff. How can that be? The body is gone, it's been cremated or it's been buried or something's happened. The only way we can understand that is if we expand our knowledge to fit the facts. And don't be scared of these things, because those ghosts, other beings, are usually very benevolent. They help us. I don't know how many times people have told me that when they're driving in a car and they fall asleep, something slaps them on the face. Don't imagine this is actually real. And just they found out they just almost running into another big truck. Sometimes, I already told you about one of our members a long time ago. He was a great member. He was like a builder's labourer. And when he passed away eventually, we did the funeral service for him in here. That was, Ron Battersby. And instead of actually being in a hearse, we actually put him in his builder's ute over there. We all waved him off. Because that was and his wife sort of drove him to Karakata for the cremation. It was a beautiful ceremony because that was personal, that was real. That's what, I was totally supportive. I don't know what happened if he actually got stopped by the police. What have you got in that box in the back? It's my husband. But that was what was in that box. But anyway, that he was the one who, that wonderful story, that when he was a builder's labourer, just starting off in life, and on one of the houses in Mount Lawley, when he was working, just cleaning up on a Friday night, and that was when he heard the sound. He was alone. He heard the sound. Put your hand under here. There's no one around. Was he imagining things? Put your hand under here. Second time. So he was a young man, just very courageous. Of course what he did was put his hand where he was told. And under the house, that's where he found a tin box full of thousands of dollars. The owner of the house before never liked paying tax and had died. That's why they were renovating the house. And they found all this money underneath. I've asked that story many times because I was a partner of Bianca. And I asked Bianca, is it okay if I tell people, was that true? She said, yeah, it was true. And many of you know that lady. She's a very devout Buddhist and usually loves looking after Jhana Grove. And even, I think she sometimes does, isn't it true, Hock Chin, she does some of the teachings of the Introduction to Meditation class here. Is she still doing those? Yeah, next month, yeah, you can ask her. But what it was that was something which was real. And it's not something you can imagine and put aside. How can that work? So one of the nice things about the things which we teach here is understanding the nature of the mind. Of course, with mindfulness, not brainfulness, getting to understand your mind and giving that a bit more respect and developing it gets stronger. And with that strong mindfulness, there's incredible benefits for your health and even for your money things and all sorts of other stuff. And sometimes I think, should we keep talking about this or are we going to get into trouble? But it's the truth. It's beneficial for your health and well-being. Why not? I've seen weird things happening in the world. People call them weird. But the truth of the matter is, it's just the mind becoming strong. So, I know that the time is going on. Please excuse me, but I love talking about stuff like this because it's challenging. And it's not stuff which you actually can read in the books, but stuff which is actually true. I'm sure that many of you had lots and lots of experiences like this, but if you do have them, what happens? Sometimes you think, I better not tell anybody because I'll be afraid that people won't believe me or they'll criticize me. They'll think I'm a bit weird. Not the case. I've seen this too many times to actually deny its existence, the nature of your mind. And also it means, just one more little thing, it means when, the death does happen to you, you're not afraid, for goodness sake. Just, here we go again. Let's get it right this time. Die properly. One of the reasons why death is fearful, because people don't know what happens next. If you were sure, you know exactly what's going to happen next, you'd be very glad when you get close to actually the dying moment. It's what happens up to that dying moment which can be unpleasant. When you get up to the dying moment, you're free. And I mean that. And so you're not really afraid of death anymore when somebody else dies. And all those times I've told you that close members of my family die, people I've known here for a long time, they die. It can be quite unpleasant sometimes when they die. But you know what happens after they die? It gives life and death a totally different meaning. It makes you understand just, you're not afraid of the shortness of your life. You're only concerned with the quality of your life. It's not how long you live, but how well you live is important. You don't go to such enormous worry about, are you sure you're healthy? Are you sure you're eating the right food? Are you recovering over from skin cancer or sunburn or COVID or crikey? We're so fearful. We don't understand the nature of the mind. Even today, one of the people who came to see me, they just remembered a story which they heard when they were 14. Over here, as a kid in the Dhamma school. And it was a story of fear. I will finish off after this, I promise. And it was Winnie the Pooh and his best friend, Piglet. Piglet was a very small being and was often very afraid. And so they were walking back from Rabbit's house, going back home when a big storm came. And the trees were swaying and branches were coming off and then trees were falling over. And little Piglet got so scared and said, what would happen? I can't go on any longer. What would happen if a tree fell when we were underneath it? That's a possibility. What would happen if you got COVID tonight? Is that a possibility? And people got scared. Little Piglet got scared. But then Winnie the Pooh, his intelligence kicked in and said, yeah, what would happen if a tree fell on us when we were underneath it? That's a possibility, said Winnie the Pooh. But then Winnie the Pooh said, what would happen if the tree didn't fall on top of us when we were underneath it? Which was far more likely. And that got rid of their fear. And they carried on. All fear is what would happen if, followed by something unpleasant. That's the definition of fear. In the future with something unpleasant. And you find usually what is unpleasant is less likely than something which is safe and pleasant. What would happen if you came to our Buddhist society this evening and didn't get COVID? Which is far more likely. Which is why I give a talk and say thank you